Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome to Dr. Roomi lectures. In our previous session, we discussed questions from endocrine physiology, and today we will discuss past university questions from sensory physiology. Very first question is: what are two ways to classify nerve fibers? Give examples of nerve fibers in each category. There are two ways to classify nerve fibers. One is the general classification, also called as Erlanger and Gasser classification, in which the nerve fibers are categorized into A, B, and C type of nerve fibers on the basis of their diameter and conduction velocity. And the other classification is sensory classification, in which nerve fibers are categorized into type 1, 2, 3, 4, which are designated by Roman numerals. Type A nerve fibers have further subgroups: A alpha, A beta, A gamma, and A delta fibers. A alpha are both motor as well as sensory. Alpha motor neurons, which supply skeletal muscle fibers, come in this category. Then we also have somatic sensory nerve fibers, which are proprioceptive nerve fibers, detecting signals from muscle spindles. These are primary afferent nerve fibers belonging to 1A category of sensory classification, and then afferents from Golgi tendon organs, 1B nerve fibers in the sensory classification. A beta fibers, they carry the sensations of fine touch, vibration, pressure, and secondary afferents from the muscle spindle, and they come under class 2 of sensory nerve fibers. A gamma are the motor neurons which supply muscle spindles, and they do not come under sensory classification. A delta nerve fibers detect and carry the sensations of crude touch, crude pressure, cold, and fast pain, and they belong to category 3 of sensory classification. Type B nerve fibers are preganglionic autonomic nerve fibers, they are not sensory. Type C nerve fibers, they are postganglionic autonomic nerve fibers, and also some sensory fibers which carry the sensation of slow pain, olfaction, and heat, and they come under category 4 of sensory classification. Next question is: explain how receptor potential is produced in a Pacinian corpuscle. Pacinian corpuscle is the receptor for deep pressure and vibration. This is present deep in our subcutaneous tissue. When we apply a vibration or deep pressure on these receptors, there is mechanical indentation which stimulates the mechanically sensitive sodium channels at the receptor area of this nerve fiber, and there is entry of sodium through the mechanically sensitive sodium channels, and then the receptor potential moves from minus 90 to threshold value, which is minus 65. When the threshold is achieved, there is opening of voltage gated sodium channels in the first node of Ranvier. Once action potential is generated in the first node of Ranvier, then this action potential jumps to the next node of Ranvier by saltatory conduction, and through positive feedback mechanism, this action potential travels along whole the nerve fiber. So this is how generator potential or receptor potential is produced in a Pacinian corpuscle. Next question is: define receptor adaptation. Differentiate between tonic and phasic receptors. Receptor adaptation means when a stimulus of constant intensity is applied continuously to a receptor, discharge of impulses from the receptor declines after some time. This is called as receptor adaptation. There are two types of receptors depending upon whether the decline of impulses with a maintained stimulus is rapid or slow. So they are rapidly adapting receptors and slowly adapting receptors. Rapidly adapting receptors are also called as phasic receptors. They show a rapid decline in the action potential in response to a constant stimulus. They primarily detect the onset and offset of the stimulus, and they can also detect movement of insects crawling across the skin. That's why they're also called as movement receptors or rate receptors. Some examples of rapidly adapting receptors are hair follicle receptors, Meissner's corpuscles, and Pacinian corpuscles. Slowly adapting receptors are also called as tonic receptors, and they respond to a maintained stimulus with a continuous discharge of impulses. Even if there is decrease in the discharge of impulses, then this decline is slow over a period of hours and maybe even days. So that's why some slowly adapting receptors, they can even be called as non-adapting receptors, like pain receptors. Their adaptation usually is not complete. Examples of slowly adapting receptors are pain receptors, cold receptors, muscle spindles, proprioceptors, baroreceptors, and chemoreceptors. Slowly adapting receptors are much more abundant as compared to rapidly adapting receptors in our body. Next question is: Briefly describe the mechanism of adaptation in a Pacinian corpuscle. Just like every receptor has a different mechanism of stimulation, they also have a different mechanism for adaptation. Specifically, for Pacinian corpuscle, there are two ways by which they show adaptation. One is structural adaptation, which means when initially we give a stimulus to Pacinian corpuscle, there is increase in pressure, hence indentation that causes receptor potential and then increase in the discharge of impulses. But after millisecond, very quickly there is a redistribution of pressure in the pacinian corpuscle because of its layers of the connective tissue, and that decreases the discharge of impulses. This is called as structural adaptation. Second way by which pacinian corpuscles show adaptation is by accommodation, which means with a continuous stimulus, initially there is increase in the discharge of impulses by signals passing through the sodium channels. Second way by which Pacinian corpuscles show adaptation is through accommodation, which means when a continuous stimulus is applied to Pacinian corpuscles, then there is inactivation of sodium channels, and this inactivation of the sodium channels lead to their decline in the impulses. Hence, they are accommodated or adapted to the constant stimulus. Next question is define sensory acuity. Describe how is it affected by receptor density and lateral inhibition. Sensory acuity is precise localization of the stimulus by defining its boundaries and providing a contrasting border. For example, in case of vision, acuity means how sharp is our vision. The ability to see two closely placed points as two, and also in case of our fingers, the ability to localize two closely placed point on the fingers as two. The two-point tactile discrimination is also an example of acuity. Acuity is very much developed in our fingers as compared to our back or our legs. And also, visual acuity is very well developed, which means we have ability to localize two closely placed points, for example, written on a board as two. This is because of our visual acuity. Sensory acuity can be increased by two important phenomena. One is the receptor density. More is the receptor density, which means when we have more number of receptors in a smaller area of our skin or in the retina, then the sensation detected will be more acute. It means that part of skin which has smaller receptor field, it will have more endings of nerve fibers supplying it, and also it will have a bigger representation in our cerebral cortex. Second phenomena is lateral inhibition. Whenever we stimulate a certain point on our skin, for example, by touch, the central area is stimulated and on its borders, the area is inhibited. This is called as lateral inhibition, which means center is stimulated and the borders are inhibited. And this also contributes to acute localization of the tactile stimulus. So just to summarize these 2 points, which means smaller receptive fields, which means more receptive density, and also ability of lateral inhibition, increase sensory acuity, and we are better able to localize the boundaries and contrast of the stimulus. Next question is list properties of sensory receptors. Briefly explain the phantom limb phenomena. Some important properties of sensory receptors are sensory transduction, receptor or generator potential, specificity or differential sensitivity, Muller's law or doctrine of specific nerve energies, adaptation or desensitization of receptors, and then response to increase in strength of stimulus, also called as Weber-Fechner law. For all these properties, you can consult my YouTube lecture on the properties of sensory receptors, in which I have discussed these properties in detail. Now coming to phantom limb phenomena, when a person has amputated leg, for example below knee or above knee, sometimes the person complains of pain or proprioceptive signals in the amputated leg, maybe coming from the foot. This can be explained by using the labeled line principle and the law of projection. Labeled line principle states that for a specific type of sensation, there is specific nervous pathway. For example, for the somatosensory signals, we have dorsal column pathway and the spinothalamic pathways. For vision, we have visual pathway, and this pathway stimulates a particular part of brain. If a nerve fiber for a specific sensation is stimulated at any point along its sensory pathway, the sensation perceived is that for which the pathway is specific. And there is point to point connection between the receptors and different parts of body present in our cerebral cortex. This is called as law of projection, which means every part of body getting signals from its receptors in the periphery then has representation in a specific part of in our cerebral cortex. So this is important for localization of the stimulus. So this is why when a certain part of body has been cut, for example foot has been cut, when the nerve fiber which are coming from the foot will be stimulated, the brain will perceive as if the signals of pain or proprioception they are coming from that missing foot. This can be understood by using the concepts of labeled line principle and the law of projection. Next university question is, elaborate the effects produced by bilateral damage of somatosensory area 1. Second part is, what is amorphosynthesis? Bilateral damage to somatosensory area 1 causes loss of the following sensory judgments. The person is unable to localize discretely. Although the person can localize whether the sensation is coming from a limb, but the accurate localization, for example, this sensation is coming from the tip of right index finger, this will be affected. And the person will also be unable to judge critical degrees of pressure against the body. Slight change in pressure will not be detected. Unable to judge weights of the object, also unable to detect the shape and form of the objects. This is called as astereognosis. And the texture of objects, whether it's rough or crude, this cannot be felt because all these functions are performed in our primary sensory area 1. However, the person's ability to detect pain and temperature sense will not be affected much because there are subcortical centers like thalamus and the reticular formation where these signals coming along the spinothalamic pathway are detected. However, once again, the localization of pain and temperature signals will be affected. Now, what are the effects which are produced by removing the somatosensory association area? This person will be unable to recognize complex objects and forms which are felt on opposite side of the body. The person will also forget that the opposite side of body is present when it is actually present. And the person forgets to use the other side of body for motor functions. And also when the person is feeling something, he uses normal side of the body to recognize one side of the object, but he forgets to use the abnormal side of body to feel some object. So he forgets whether his affected side of body is present or not. So it means if there is damage to the somatosensory association area on the right side, on the left side all these kind of problems will be present, and this is collectively called as amorphosynthesis. Next question is, a 40 years old man was involved in a road traffic accident. X-ray of the spine showed fracture dislocation of the vertebrae. After a few days, he developed features indicating left side hemisection of spinal cord. Explain the features at and below the level of hemisection of spinal cord. Another question is, name the syndrome which occurs due to hemisection of spinal cord. Explain the features at and below the level of hemisection of spinal cord. So in both of these questions, the answer is Brown-Sequard syndrome. We can understand the sensory and motor deficits of this syndrome if we know which sensory and motor tracts are damaged and which sensory or motor signals are carried by these tracts and where is the level of crossing over. Let's suppose this hemisection is at the level of T12 on left side. So on left side, below the level of lien, there will be loss of all the sensations which are carried by dorsal column pathway because dorsal column pathway does not cross within spinal cord. So on left side, signals like vibration, proprioception, fine touch, fine pressure, they will be lost below the level of lien. However, the signals which are carried by spinothalamic tract on the opposite side of body will be lost, which means just 1 to 2 segments below the lien On the opposite side, these signals like pain and temperature will be affected because spinothalamic pathway it cross to opposite side just one or two segments above. So spinothalamic signals like pain temperature will be lost below L1 L2 on the opposite side, which means on the right side of the body. And also on the same side there will be features of upper motor neuron lesion, which mean on the left side features of upper motor neuron lesion will be present. Please don't be worried because at this point you have not studied what is meant by lower and upper motor neuron lesion. However, you will be able to understand this concept later on when we will study motor physiology. And at the level of lesion, which means on the left side at T12, there will be loss of all the sensations carried by dorsal column pathway and spinothalamic pathway because even in spinothalamic pathway, the signals have not crossed at the same segment. And there will also be features of lower motor neuron lesion at the level of lesion. If I ask you this question, which somatosensory pathway is more important for our survival? The answer is it's spinothalamic pathway because it carries very important pain and temperature signal. So this is why in a person having Brown-Sequard syndrome on left side, there will be loss of dorsal column sensation on the left side below the level of lesion. However, on the right side, 1 to 2 segment below the level of lesion, there will be loss of pain and temperature signal. So this is why there will be profound sensory loss on the opposite side, 1 to 2 segments below the lesion. And what about motor loss? There will be profound motor loss on the same side below the level of lesion. It is because of damage to the corticospinal tract. And this will produce features of upper motor neuron lesion. Next question is compare the dorsal column medial lemniscal system with anterolateral system in terms of their pathways and types of nerve fibers and also the sensations carried. Dorsal column pathway has receptors which are usually encapsulated like Meissner and Pacinian corpuscles. In case of spinothalamic pathway, the receptors are free nerve endings. Nerve fibers in the dorsal column pathway, they are large myelinated nerve fibers which conduct at a faster speed of 40 to 120 meters per second, and these are A alpha and A beta types of nerve fibers. In spinothalamic pathway, the fibers are A delta or type C nerve fibers, and they conduct at a slower velocity of 0.5 to 30 meters per second. The crossing of nerve fibers in dorsal column pathway is in medulla, but the crossing of nerve fibers in spinothalamic pathway is in the spinal cord. The sensations carried by dorsal column pathway are finely localized, and also we can perceive small changes in the intensity of stimulus. But the sensations detected by spinothalamic pathway they are not accurately localized, and also the fine grades of intensity they cannot be easily detected by spinothalamic pathway. Final perception of sensations in dorsal column pathway is in the primary sensory cortex. In case of spinothalamic pathway, the sensations are perceived, yes, at the sensory cortex level, but we also have subcortical centers, which are thalamus and the reticular formation. Sensation carried in dorsal column pathway are vibration, fine touch, fine pressure, two-point tactile discrimination, stereokinesis, graphesthesia, and conscious proprioception. The spinothalamic pathway carries sensations like crude touch, crude pressure, tickle and itch, sexual sensations, pain, and temperature. Next question is differentiate between the features of fast and slow pain pathways. Fast pain is perceived within zero point 0.1 second after the stimulus is applied. Slow pain is felt in 1 second or later after the stimulus is applied. Fast pain is carried by new spinothalamic pathway and slow pain is carried by paleo-spinothalamic pathway. The nerve fibers which carry fast pain are type A delta nerve fibers which carry at a faster speed of 60 to 30 meters per second. Slow pain fibers are small unmyelinated nerve fibers which are type C and they carry at a speed of 0.5 to 2 meters per second. The most probable neurotransmitter of first order neurons of fast pain pathway is glutamate, which is released in the dorsal gray horn of spinal cord. Substance phase is the neurotransmitter released from the first order neurons in the dorsal gray horn of spinal cord. First order neurons in fast pain relay at lamina 1 of spinal cord. First order neurons in slow pain relay at lamina 2 and 3 of spinal cord in the dorsal gray horn. The relay for fast pain is in the ventrobasal complex and also in the posterior nucleus of thalamus. But in case of slow pain, the relay is in intralaminar nucleus of thalamus. The perception of fast pain is primarily in the primary sensory cortex. In case of slow pain, the sensation is perceived in brainstem and thalamus, which are the subcortical centers, and also in the cerebral cortex. Fast pain is better localized and slow pain is poorly localized. Next question is, a 24 years old lady was looking for flowers in the garden for her wedding anniversary. She noticed a beautiful red rose and tries to pluck it. While doing so, one of the thorns pricks her finger. This forced her to suddenly withdraw her hand due to pain. Which pain pathway became activated after thorn prick, and name the released neurotransmitter? So whenever we have a pin prick or thorn prick, there is fast pain, and the neurotransmitter which is released from the type A delta nerve fibers in the dorsal gray horn of spinal cord is glutamate. Second part of this question is, how analgesia system helped this lady to forget the pain feelings. And third part is, draw the sketch showing the involvement of analgesia system components in pain suppression. Another question is, what is analgesia system? Briefly explain this system. So I will answer all these questions. Analgesia system is the body's natural pain suppression system. It's a descending pathway which provides pain relief, and this is because of presence of endogenous neurotransmitters like enkephalin, which is a natural opiate, and also some non-opiate substances like serotonin. The important components of this natural pain suppression system are periventricular nucleus in the hypothalamus, which sends its nerve fiber to the periaqueductal gray matter. The nerve fibers in the periaqueductal gray matter send signals to the raphe magnus nucleus, which is present in the lower medulla and upper pons. The nerve fibers of periventricular nucleus and periaqueductal gray matter release enkephalin. Neurons which start from raphe magnus nucleus send signals to the dorsal gray horn of spinal cord, and these release serotonin. Nerve fibers which are present in the pain inhibitory complex of the dorsal gray horn of spinal cord, they release enkephalin, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. These components of the pain suppression system, when are stimulated electrically or by injection of morphine experimentally, they show profound pain suppression. And same is done when they are stimulated by neurotransmitters like enkephalin, serotonin, which are present endogenously, or when these chemicals are given from outside of the body. You can see here the diagram of analgesia system showing its various components, and the signals which are entering from the periphery along type C, type A delta nerve fibers can be suppressed at the presynaptic or postsynaptic levels by the neurotransmitters and caffeine which are released in the dorsal gray horn of spinal cord. And the same can also be done at the components present in brainstem and in the periaqueductal or periventricular nuclei. It's important to note that the flexor reflex or any other reflex which is initiated by pain can be suppressed or diminished by activation of the analgesia system. Different people have different sensitivity to pain, and this difference is because of under or overactivity of the natural pain control system. The action of analgesia system can be modulated by some factors like stress and exercise. It has been observed that exercise increases the production of opiate substances like endorphins, and also stress increases the production of cortisol, epinephrine, and some other chemicals which also have painkiller effects. Last question is, explain the mechanism of referred pain with the help of a diagram. Referred pain is a pain which is felt on a somatic part of body that is removed from a visceral organ that is causing pain. For example, a person who is having pain in the heart because of myocardial infarction can be referred to left arm or left neck, which are somatic parts. Knowledge of referred pain is important for diagnosis of various clinical conditions. The mechanism of referred pain can be easily understood by using the concept of dermatomal rule, which explains that two structures, somatic and visceral, they have the same nerve supply going to the same segments of spinal cord, which means that embryologically those two structures, the somatic and visceral, they initially were present in the same place and they were getting the same nerve supply, but later on those two structures they moved away from each other, and their nerve supply remained the same. So whenever the pain is there in the visceral region, it will also be felt in the somatic region because both of them are having the same nerve supply going to the same segments of spinal cord. So this dermatomal rule helps us understand the mechanism of referred pain. So far we have discussed university questions from sensory physiology. We will study university questions from special senses and motor physiology later on in other videos. I hope the discussion of these past university questions will be very helpful for you to prepare for exams. If you have any suggestions for me to record past SCQs or MCQs from any topic of physiology, please let me know in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching this video. See you next time with another video.